Hey, my name is Josh, and today we're going to look at how to use the LaunchPad Pro with the Octatrack. I got this idea from watching a video that Novation put out a while ago. I think I put the link in the description, but in the video they go over how they use it and some of the cool features that are possible. What we're going to do today is go over how I set it up by looking at my setup first, then really deep diving into the Octatrack and then the LaunchPad. It's not super difficult, but it did take some documentation diving, for lack of a better word, to figure out exactly all of those MIDI mappings and stuff. So I hope you guys like this video. If you do, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe, and hopefully I could be making more stuff that you guys like and find useful soon. So without any further ado, let's go get started. The first of these pages is a bank of faders that controls all 8 of the tracks on the Octatrack. So if you look here on track 1, I'm going to be on track 1 first, then I'm going to hit that fader, it'll climb, and you can tell if you look at the one on screen here, it'll go along with it, which is pretty neat. The other thing I could do is alternatively hit all 8 of these at the same time and bring in all 8 of these tracks independently, which is really great. So if I do that slowly, I'm gonna do pressure sensitively, go slow. You can see that they're all decreasing at their own rate. And then alternatively, if I want to bring 6 up, I know that this is 6, I could just tap it and it shoots back up. So this is a really great way to control the levels of each of the tracks, period, right? Because you can't do that on the Octatrack. As it comes out of the box, you need to hop into each one of these and then hit a knob to control the levels here. So that is neat. I'm gonna go ahead and juice them all. So let's go over to the next page where we're gonna look at how I have my general control setup. So the way that this works is that I have, if we start from the top down, this is actually the crossfader, which is really neat. If you look at the bottom of the screen, it'll go from 1 to 2, which is how I have. So I have set, whatever this is called, I don't really know. This is like a preset. And then here, this one is 2. So as I go from 1 to 2, that little line moves. Same way if I were to tap that, the line also moves. If I were to go slowly, it'll slowly crossfade. So if I'm working on the LaunchPad, again, just grabbing this is perfectly fine. But if I'm working on the LaunchPad and I'm not right next to the Octatrack, I'd like to be able to control that crossfader, which is pretty sweet. I have a bank of 32 pads. So what's really cool about this is that this page is dedicated to the track. So if I'm on track 1, and track 1 is a slice track, I'm able to control 32 of those slices right here on these 2 pads. If it's a chromatic track, then I'll just hop onto the keyboard down here and I have an octave to work with there. Something else I like to do quite a bit is mute tracks. So you can tell here the lights went off. I have all 8 mutes right here. I could unmute them as well. Another cool feature to have, just because I may just want to solo on a part that I know is on track 1, mute tracks 2 and 3 if those are drums, then bring them back in. All without needing to go in, and I could just do function and do it that way, but sometimes it's just easier to have them at your fingertips right there. All right, so these next 2 are more contextually based on how the different tracks are configured. So if we look at tracks 1 through 4, we're going to talk about in another video, these are going to be set up for slices. The way that they're set up for slices is by holding down the MIDI key and then going up or down. And you can see I'm going to jump to the different tracks, and these are all set up to be slices. Tracks 5 through 8, those are going to be set up to be chromatic. So you're going to see that this pad is, this is tracks 1 through 4. Then if I hop over here, these are all going to be a set of chromatic keys. And what that allows me to do, if I were to just hit no here, that would allow me to play what's on each of these tracks independently. So I could play tracks 1 through 4 right there, and I'm sending MIDI to each of these tracks and playing them. And same thing goes with tracks 5 through 8. I'm able to send my keystrokes. Oh yeah, you could actually see it. Yeah, so. All right, let's look at the different parameters that we're going to need to check out in order to get this thing to work correctly with the LaunchPad. A lot of the settings are going to be in the MIDI and the MIDI sync settings. So we're going to go through the project settings views first. So I'm going to go to the top of it so that it looks the same. All right, so you're going to see something that looks just like this as soon as you hit this project button most of the time. If you don't, like I did before, just hit the no button and it'll bring you to the top. So In the project view, here's where we have our normal saving parameter, sync to card, which is nice. System, we're gonna go ahead and do nothing in here in personalize. I like to set up quantize live recording. That's just because my time isn't awesome. So I like to do that. If you didn't know, you could adjust the brightness with the latest firmware update, but that's not what we're here for. Let's go into control. So here's the first of the two settings. And here's one that I want to make sure is set up in order for this to work correctly. And it's going to be that track 8 I'm going to have as a normal track. So you may want to use this as a master. If you do, just leave it as a master track. But if you don't, I have it as normal. So if you don't do this, you won't be able to control track number 8. All right. So that's all I believe we need from this menu. Let's hop over into the MIDI menu and go to control. So here's the first big one. In control, this is really critical. This needs to be set to map and track. I believe it's mostly set to standard when you get it out of the box. So what you need to do to change it is, if it's standard, is hit this twice, go to the right twice until it says map track. And what this will do is allow the MIDI data to be sent to the individual tracks based off of how they're configured. And we'll talk about that here in a second. All right, so this is done. That's map track. Next thing I want to do is look at sync. So I like to have the transport controls, so the stop, play, record buttons on my LaunchPad send data. So what I'm going to do is make sure that they are set to receive. If you want the Octatrack to be the only thing that could send transport, then you would alternatively turn off receive and then turn on send. If you want both devices to be able to send data, you're going to have them both set. But I'm going to be doing a lot of my tippity tapping on the LaunchPad, so I'm going to go ahead and just have this receive. Same thing over here. I'm going to have the Octatrack receive clock. Now, you could do both send and receive. If you're in a larger setup, I don't really like doing that. I like having one clock source, and for what I'm doing, I want the clock source to be coming from the LaunchPad. You could do some really wild stuff with the sequencer on the LaunchPad, interacting with the sequencer on the Octatrack, which is technically superior, but the one on the LaunchPad is a little more accessible, and I think you can get some pretty wild stuff by having them both going at the same time. Over to channels, this is another one that's pretty important. So I wanna make sure that the auto channel is set to 16. What that'll allow us to do is have MIDI data impact or affect channels 16 all the way through 1. For those who don't know, the Octatrack is actually a 16 track, 8 audio tracks and 8 MIDI tracks. If you were to hit MIDI, you've just enabled all of these to be MIDI tracks. We'll talk about that at another time. But for right now, what I want to do is have this be 16 because I want all of the data to be coming in and impacting all of the tracks. If you had this set to 11 or something, you'd only send MIDI data over to tracks 1 through 11, 12 through 16 wouldn't be impacted. So long story short, have that set to 16. And then turbo status, don't worry about it. I know it sounds like a Street Fighter setting, but it's not. I think it's a protocol for the Octatrack to talk to some of Electron's older devices. Now, let's go ahead and hop in on the individual MIDI tracks. Sorry, the individual tracks, not MIDI tracks, audio ones. So part of what we're gonna need to do is hold down the MIDI button now that our settings are correct, and then hit the up or down arrow with the MIDI button in, and you're gonna get to this MIDI map mode. And what this will allow you to do, I think they're mostly set to standard. What you're gonna wanna do is go and set them all to, well, set these 4, the way that I'm doing it, to a slice mode, then jump to track 2, do the same thing, 3 and 4, and then similarly for track 5, I'm gonna set this to be chromatic. And then 6, 7, and 8. If you leave this as a master, you won't have the option to set it, so just keep that in mind. And that's really it. Here we are. Let's go ahead and figure out how I set up the LaunchPad to work with the Octatrack. All right. So first steps first, we're going to go to components.novationmusic.com. This is where Novation put all their configuration tools. It's on a website, which is pretty nifty. So going to the website, going to select what I'm going to use. What we're going to do today works on the Mini X and the Pro. So let's go ahead and go to the LaunchPad Pro, which is what I'm using today. And for the sake of visibility, I'm going to go ahead and just pull up the custom ones I have. And that's what I want to see. All right. So the first one we're going to be doing is this fader setup. Let's just go ahead and recreate this, right? So I'm going to make a new one. I'm going to make a new create mode. And then I know that it's a vertical unipolar fader. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that. And then click on it or click on settings, and then you'll be able to tell it whatever you want to do, right? So let's go to faders and then look at what I did. So all I did was grab a bunch of these vertical unipolar faders. And if I click on settings, and I click on one of these guys, you can see what I did. So on each of these, it's the same MIDI CC number. It's 7. And then I just changed the channel, right? So there are 8 tracks that I want to control audio for. On the Octatrack, I have 8 tracks on this. And they're all going to MIDI CC number 7. Pretty straightforward. I made the colors what I did. You can't really control the swell settings. So you know how when in the other video, I tapped them all and they came up. There's no way to change the sensitivity to the velocity or anything like that, but it's pretty well configured. I don't need a ton more. The colors are whatever. This is supposed to be the color that comes up in the bottom of your LaunchPad. Mine doesn't do a great job at showing what that colors should be, so I'll just let it be. Let's look at the big workhorse here. So this is the one that I put the most thought into, and it's really going to be impacted by you watching that other video and following it through. So I would, if you haven't watched that, stop now, go watch that and come back. So the general idea before we go into it with this page is that these are some controls that I like to have at all times, right? No matter what I'm doing, I could use this and get the majority of what I want to do done. Going from top to bottom, we have our crossfader. I have a bank of 32 pads, 1 octave, and some mute switches. The way that this works is that it goes to the active track. So if I go from track 1 to track 2, all of these would work depending on how track 2 is set up. If I go to track 8, it'll work depending on how track 8 is set up. So if I go from the top, what I have first is a crossfader. I get to use the benefits of the cross fading slowly based off of the button I press, and I could just grab it. I could just grab it and make it work by itself, or I could, if I'm over here on the LaunchPad, hit it and it'll fade. I could tap it harder and it'll go quicker over. So I could really control the transitions on the face of the device as opposed to having to grab the Octatrack if I'm not by it. I'm by it most of the time, but I thought it was pretty cool to have. So for your reference, if you're setting this up yourself, it'll be CC number 48 and MIDI channel 1. I like to put it away from the things I'm mostly hitting just because I don't want to accidentally crossfade into another set of effects and I'll make everything go nuts. So pretty neat. Hopping over to the pad bank. So I put quite a bit of thought into this. So what this will let me do is on a track set to slices, I'm able to play 32 samples. I like to stay within 16 and you'll see why later, but this lets me play something that I've chopped into 32 slices in case that were to happen. The really tricky part about this is how I have them set up. So you can see that this starts at C-1, which is on the range of the keyboard, how Electron has set up the Octatrack to listen to MIDI. It's C-1, and I have this other bank to E0. The reason it's not C0 is because it would have some redundancy, right? There are 12 notes in an octave. If I have 4 more notes, this top row and this bottom row would end up being the same. So I just shifted it a bit so that I have 32 unique pads. So that's the kind of thing that it's good to think about. And one thing that's really important is hitting channel 16 on both. Channel 16, if you remember, is what you set the auto channel to. And that way, anything 16 and above would be impacted. The way that this is configured, it will go to the active track. Now, if that track happens to be chromatic and I didn't want to switch to another page and still be able to play my octave, that's how I have this keyboard set up. I can play an octave's worth of keys from C to C or whatever the root note happens to be based off of the sample. I have my pads there to make it work, which is nice. It's important that you have it set up to octave 5 because that's where the chromatic keys are set up on the Octatrack to work best. So make sure that that's done. The control change buttons that trigger the mutes. You can configure this any way that you want. Just be sure that you're using CC number 49 and each button goes to a different channel. So that's how you're gonna mute the different audio channels. I have mine set to a toggle, and that's because I like to see when it's off that the light is off. They have some other options. So if you were to hit momentary, you can go ahead and hit it like a kill switch, like you have on a guitar. Sometimes they have kill switches where you go a little dolphin sound, but you would just do that by tapping if you had it set to momentary. Or you could have a trigger, you would hit it, it would trigger the mute, but the light would stay on. And for a mute switch, I don't see much value in doing that because I like to see light off, muted, light on, unmuted. That's simple. So that's why I'm doing it. And part of what I want you to get out of this is why I'm doing things a certain way. It doesn't really help me if I just give you the answer and then you just have my template and then so what? You're not gonna know what to do with it. So let's look at my slice pages. As I walked you through the Octatrack itself, I showed you my initial starting template. Tracks 1 through 4 were slices, tracks 5 through 8 were chromatic. That's the way I like to start. If I'm feeling it, by the time I get to needing those chromatic tracks, I may need more slices. I may need fewer slices. So learning how this gets set up would help you get that a little easier. So let's look at these slices. So the way that this works is that I have a bank of 16 pads set up for channels 1 through 4, meaning that I could play all 4 tracks at the same time with pads. It's pretty sweet. So 16 is, that's why I mentioned earlier that I like to slice things into 16 slices if I can, because I get them to all fit on here. If I happen to go over that, go to 32, I can just hop over to this guy, work them out, it's fine. But I like to live in that 16 slice range just so I could use my 4 banks of 4 pads each. So the way I have that set up, if you didn't catch it before, was I start on C-1 for channels 1, 2, 3, and 4. Let's just do an exercise now. Let's say I wanted a set of pads for 5 through 8, right? So how would I do that? I would go ahead and change them, right? I would go 4. I'm gonna start at 5, 6, 7, 8. Guys, save this, save as. Go 5 through 8. Boom. 5 through 8 is done. If I want to send it to the LaunchPad, click that, click on number 5, sends it over. It's worth noting, the only difference between a Mini, a Pro, and an X are the number, well, for this particular exercise, are the number of custom modes, right? So you may have fewer. So there you go. I have 5 through 8 sitting there. Beautiful. Let's go ahead and look at if I happen to need keys, right? So in my template that I looked at earlier, tracks 5 through 8 are chromatic. So I have a sample there that's, I've made sure that, 5 through 8 are pitched relatively well to each other. So if they're not all the same note, they play well. And now I can control them all independently. I could play 5 through 8 independently, which is really nice if you have, an idea as you would have a chord and you would be able to play each note of that chord with a different sound. And that could be cool. It could be terrible if you don't tune your samples correctly. So definitely something that's cool, but need some homework done beforehand to get it to be perfect, right? Something that people may be interested in is, well, what if I have a sample and I just want to play it in a scale? Well, you would need to know the scale beforehand, but if you did, you could easily make something. So let's go ahead and make that now. I'm gonna go ahead and create a new one, get some widgets. I'm gonna get my scale keyboard, and this is neat because I could make 8 different scales that go to the active track, right? Or alternatively, if I know what I already want to do, I could have my samples all set up, sliced perfectly. I know what key the song is in, that the keys based off of at that point, it would be based off of whatever I sliced if there's some instrumental stuff. So I have my key based off of that, then I could program this to only give me notes on the right scale. So you could pick any one of these scales. Let's just say it's minor. I don't really care what note it is because I know that I'm going to be in the 5th octave. And the ends a different color and the inside a different color. and that way I could distinguish. Like I did before, I would save it, shoot it over to my Octatrack depending on the project I'm working on, and get it to do what I need for the set. It's a really versatile system that Novation has had set up here. It works really well with the Octatrack, and it's probably best if you set it up yourself, knowing what you want to do. Make it your own, right? I could give you my template, but that's not going to help you make it your own, and you're just going to be trapped in another constraint that you don't need to have, right? So that's really all there is to it. You come out of the MIDI output through an adapter, because it's one of those TRS cable MIDI deals. Plug in the adapter, it goes into the Octatrack, and yeah, if you watch my other video on how to set it up, you should be good to go. All right, so there it is. You're able to set up your Launchpad with your Octatrack. So go ahead, use what you learned here, set up your Octatrack, have fun, share your music. If you have anything to say in the comments, good or bad, throw it down there. If you like what you saw, just remember to like, follow, subscribe, hit the bell. I haven't had to say that in a while. But yeah, hit the bell if you want to get notifications for when I put out more videos. If you want some free stuff, make sure to get on the website in the description. I have some free samples. I put out a bunch of samples last year, one every day in 2020. And yeah, they're all for free on my website. So if you like that, check it out. I have the link to Novation Stream so you can see how they had their setup. It's a bit different, but the point's there. And yeah, have a good one, and I'll see you guys next time.